On January 10, 1991, a female inmate named Zheng Xiaorong, serving time for murder at just 19 years old, ended her own life by jumping from the prison rooftop. The correctional officers and fellow inmates who shared her cell block all felt immense sorrow and grief for this young woman's fate. During her early days in detention, when other female prisoners learned that she had committed murder but wasn't sentenced to death, and that she even received special care from correctional officers compared to other inmates, everyone assumed she must have powerful connections or come from an influential family. However, as they gradually learned the heartbreaking truth behind her case, they couldn't help but develop deep sympathy and compassion for this unfortunate young woman. Xiaorong was born in 1972, a girl born and raised in Dalian City, Liaoning Province. After her parents passed away when she was young, she was raised and cared for by her much older sister. Her sister, named Zheng Xiaoxia, possessed exceptional beauty and was considered an outstanding beauty in the surrounding villages, causing many men to become infatuated and actively pursue her. Speaking of which, we must mention Xiaoxia's husband, who was the central figure and key player in this tragic case. His name was Chang Fuxiao. Initially, Fuxiao was just an ordinary carpenter with fairly skilled and dexterous craftsmanship, but his nature was extremely lustful and promiscuous, yet he was very good at sweet-talking. Countless young girls living in that area had been enchanted and captivated by his honeyed words and sweet talk. Some naive girls were even willing to voluntarily leave home to live with him, but whenever marriage was mentioned, he would always find every excuse to shirk responsibility or even disappear without a trace. It's no exaggeration to say that Fuxiao was a philandering, unfaithful, and despicable man whose bad reputation had spread throughout the village, and everyone knew his true nature. Years ago, when Xiaorong's father was still alive, the family was renovating their old house when they unfortunately encountered a shortage of building materials. Fuxiao, who had long been secretly eyeing and coveting Xiaoxia's beauty, immediately and quickly brought some building materials to the Zheng family home to show enthusiasm in helping, but in reality, he wanted to win the family's favor. However, Mr. Zheng was a wise man who knew well of Fuxiao's bad reputation for promiscuity and understood better than anyone that this man was merely using the excuse of helping and providing materials as an opportunity to approach and get acquainted with his daughter. At that time, Xiaoxia had already reached adulthood and marriageable age, and Fuxiao's real purpose was clearly aimed at the beautiful daughter of the Zheng family. Precisely because he recognized this evil nature and intention, Mr. Zheng immediately refused firmly and decisively, causing Fuxiao to lose face in front of everyone. However, Fuxiao still wouldn't give up and quickly changed his words. He declared that these building materials weren't a gift, but merely a temporary loan to the Zheng family, asking Mr. Zheng to write an IOU, and after repayment, they would be square with no debts between them. Wanting to complete the house soon, Xiaorong's father reluctantly accepted this proposal, but as soon as he got home, he immediately instructed his eldest daughter to stay away and not have contact with this promiscuous man. However, as a smooth talker skilled in persuasion, Fuxiao wouldn't easily give up his target. Day after day, he continuously found every reason and excuse to come to the Zheng family's construction site, appearing enthusiastic and flattering and helping with various tasks. Over time, he gradually became familiar and close to Xiaoxia. Xiaoxia was an innocent girl who had never experienced any romantic relationship before. Facing Fuxiao's extremely experienced and sweet flirtation tactics, she soon gradually forgot her father's stern warnings. Nevertheless, she tried to maintain the final boundary and not let things go too far. However, disgustingly, Fuxiao deliberately boasted about this matter everywhere, spreading word throughout the village that he had conquered Xiaoxia. In rural areas at that time, a daughter's honor was an extremely important matter related to the family's reputation. When he learned of this, her father was so angry he was speechless, but under pressure from the surrounding villagers' gossip and discussions, he ultimately had to painfully marry his daughter to Fuxiao. Not long after, the father of the Zheng sisters passed away, leaving great pain and loss for the family. In the house, now only young Xiaorong remained, too young to be independent, so she had to rely on her sister and move in to live with her sister and brother-in-law Fu Cao under one roof. Several years later, the economy in Dalian City developed strongly and rapidly, opening up many new business opportunities. Fu Cao, who had keenly ventured out to make a living early on, had now become a well-known construction contractor with a certain status. Thanks to his clever speaking skills, good communication, and seemingly proper and respectable business practices, his business became increasingly smooth and prosperous. Money flowed endlessly into his pockets, and the family's life gradually became much more comfortable and affluent than before. However, once he had money and status, in the heart of the bustling city full of temptations, Fu Cao revealed his true nature and inherent evil character. He frequently wandered and frequented places of debauchery, no longer having any interest or concern for his virtuous wife waiting at home in the countryside. Xiaoxia was fully aware of Fu Cao's debauchery outside, but she was just a weak woman who also had to bear the responsibility of caring for 2 young children and her younger sister, Xiaorong, who was still in school and needed money for education. In addition, with deeply ingrained traditional feudal thinking that once married, a woman must accept her fate, what could she do but grit her teeth, swallow her tears, and continue living with this unfaithful husband for the sake of the children? Time passed to 1990, when Xiaorong entered the college entrance examination, an important turning point in her life. Throughout the preparation period, her academic performance remained fairly stable, but for some reason, on the actual exam day, she didn't perform as expected. The final announced results disappointed the entire family. She failed to get into college. At that time, in rural areas, the concept of higher education wasn't really widespread. Most young people after finishing middle school or high school chose to drop out to work and earn money to support their families. The belief that entering society early means earning money early was deeply ingrained in the people's thinking there. Xiaorong was also influenced by her surroundings and began to think she shouldn't continue relying on her sister. She developed the idea that she should become independent early, earn money herself, and take care of her own life rather than continuing to live off her sister's support. Because of this thinking, although her sister earnestly advised her to study for another year to retake the college entrance exam, Xiaorong firmly refused. She believed it was time to step into the real world and find her own path forward. At the end of 1990, Fu Cao brought many gifts back to the countryside to celebrate the Lunar New Year with his wife's family. Seeing her brother-in-law dressed smartly, carrying expensive items, with the confident and prosperous appearance of a successful man, Xiaorong couldn't help but feel admiration. Life in the city seemed to have completely transformed her brother-in-law, making her curious about the world beyond this poor village. During the New Year's Eve dinner, the whole family gathered around the feast, eating and chatting happily. In that warm atmosphere, Fu Cao glanced at his sister-in-law in her new clothes and was stunned. The little girl from before had now grown up, her face increasingly delicate, her figure slender, her gestures graceful and charming. Time seemed to have transformed his sister-in-law into a beautiful young woman. When he heard that Xiaorong had decided not to continue her studies but wanted to work and earn money, a calculation flashed in Fu Cao's mind. He appeared enthusiastic, saying that the city had more development opportunities than the countryside, higher wages, and a better life, and he could let Xiaorong come try it out. He added that his construction site currently needed to hire office staff, and if she wanted, he could arrange it for her. Xiaoxia, sitting beside them and hearing this conversation, felt a bit hesitant and a vague worry arose. She knew her husband's behavior outside wasn't entirely proper, but thinking again, this was her own younger sister who had grown up in the same house since childhood, a family member. Surely he wouldn't have designs on her own sister. With that thought, she reassured herself and just remained silent, lowering her head to continue picking up a piece of sticky rice cake in her bowl, saying nothing more. Xiaorong was completely different. Her eyes lit up when she saw how her brother-in-law had returned to the village looking prestigious and elegant. Thinking that she would soon go to the city, work, and earn money herself, no longer having to rely on or depend on anyone, she felt extremely excited. She immediately nodded enthusiastically in agreement without any hesitation. Seeing Xiaorong accept so easily, Fu Cao's eyes flashed with satisfaction, hiding something incomprehensible. However, at this moment, the two Zheng sisters never suspected that what awaited them ahead wasn't a bright opportunity, but a dark nightmare. In 1991, after the Lunar New Year holiday ended, people in the village gradually packed their belongings to return to the city to continue their work. Xiaorong was among them. She eagerly followed Fu Cao to the city, stepping into a new life at the construction site. Because Xiaorong was a girl with little work experience, Fu Cao arranged for her a position doing logistics work in the office. This job was quite light, didn't require much physical strength, mainly organizing documents, keeping records, and other miscellaneous tasks. Having a stable job right from the start, Xiaorong felt very happy and grateful. Moreover, her brother-in-law seemed particularly concerned about her. He frequently stopped by to ask if she was adapting to the work, if she was having any difficulties, his attitude always kind and attentive. With the naivety and lack of life experience of a young woman just grown up, Xiaorong thought this was simply her brother-in-law's care for his sister-in-law, stemming from family affection. Until one day, when Fu Cao suddenly revealed his true face, Xiaorong suddenly awakened and realized that all the caring words and attentive gestures he had shown her before were merely an outward disguise. The truth behind it was a truly disgusting face. But by the time she realized this cruel truth, everything was too late. On May 1st, 1991, most workers at the construction site had returned to their hometowns for the Labor Day holiday, enjoying a rare vacation with their families. Xiaorong also very much wanted to return home to visit her sister and family, but due to work reasons, actually due to Fu Cao's deliberate arrangement, she couldn't leave the construction site at this time was quite deserted, with only a few people remaining on duty. Around 9 p.m. that night, in the pitch-dark darkness, after washing her face clean, changing into pajamas and sitting relaxed on the sofa browsing entertainment videos, Xiaorong suddenly heard urgent knocking from outside. She stood up, walked to the door, and recognized Fu Cao's voice. Thinking there must be an urgent matter at the construction site that needed to be resolved, she didn't suspect anything and hurriedly opened the door. Unexpectedly, as soon as she opened the door, Fu Cao, reeking heavily of alcohol with bloodshot eyes, stumbled straight at her. Xiaorong was completely stunned, so surprised she couldn't react in time. When she came to her senses, she struggled with all her might, resisting, trying to push him away. But she was just a slender 19-year-old girl. How could she have enough strength to fight against a strong adult man who was drunk and out of control? That night, Xiaorong sobbed in utter despair and helplessness. She not only had her precious innocence as a young woman stolen, but her soul was also deeply wounded, forever carrying this painful shadow. Tears kept falling endlessly on her pale face. In those moments of numbing pain, the first thing she thought of was to immediately call her sister, the only relative she could trust and rely on, who had raised her since childhood. But when holding the phone, Xiaorong hesitated. She thought about how Fu Cao was her sister's husband, the pillar of her sister's family. If she spoke this cruel truth, it would certainly completely destroy her sister's family happiness. How would her sister suffer? How would the family fall apart? Moreover, she convinced herself that perhaps he was too drunk and lost control. This was just a momentary, irrational act and not intentional. Thinking this way, she became even more hesitant, not knowing what to do. So many intertwined thoughts and overwhelming conflicts in her mind caused Xiaorong extreme suffering. The physical pain, combined with mental turmoil, almost made her collapse. Finally, after a sleepless night of tossing and turning, she chose silence and to bear this pain herself. She had a faint hope that the next morning, when sober, her brother-in-law would recognize his mistake and give her an explanation. However, when sober, Fu Cao not only showed no remorse or shame whatsoever, but casually threw her a savings book with 10,000 yuan, approximately $1,500, treating what had just happened as an ordinary transaction. This cold action and attitude stunned Xiaorong. In the eyes of a promiscuous man accustomed to paying women like him, there was no woman that money couldn't buy. To him, this matter was just a simple transaction. Money could solve everything. He believed that as long as he gave money, everything could be settled, nothing to worry about or feel guilty about. Right then, no matter how naive, Xiaorong understood one thing clearly. Fukao wasn't drunk and irrational as she had thought. This was completely a long-planned scheme, an elaborately staged trap. From when he suggested she come work at the construction site, from those false caring words, from arranging for her to stay alone on the holiday, everything was a step in his dark conspiracy. She had naively walked into the trap he had set from the beginning. In the following days, Xiaorong locked her room door tightly, not letting anyone in. She barely ate or drank anything, her hair disheveled, her face pale, her eyes dark-circled and empty. Her mental state was so chaotic she couldn't control her own thoughts. Eventually, physical exhaustion combined with extreme psychological pain caused her to develop a persistent high fever that wouldn't subside. One can imagine that being treated so cruelly by her own brother-in-law caused Xiaorong to endure a terrible psychological and mental shock. In her mind, all kinds of conflicting thoughts intertwined. On one hand, worrying about her sister's happiness, fearing that revealing the truth would destroy her sister's family. On the other hand, feeling shame and humiliation to the depths of her heart about what had happened to her. She was torn between two opposing currents of emotion, not knowing what to do, not knowing whom to trust, and not knowing where the path ahead would lead. However, Fukao was inherently cruel, completely indifferent to Xiaorong's pain or emotions. In his sick thinking, he was the one with authority in the house. From childhood to adulthood, hadn't Xiaorong's food and clothing all depended on his benevolence? A few days later, he shamelessly came to Xiaorong's room again. Despite her determined resistance and eyes full of fear, Fukao ignored everything. Even knowing she was menstruating, he still brutally violated her, once again pushing the young woman into the depths of despair. After that cruel torment, Fukao fell into a drunken sleep on the bed, having no worry or remorse whatsoever. Meanwhile, Xiaorong sat beside him in the darkness, her eyes full of hatred and despair. In her heart, flames of rage were burning fiercely, dark thoughts continuously appearing in her mind. Thinking about what had just happened, Xiaorong was blinded by rage, rushed outside to grab a large knife, and returned to the room. Chang Fukao, the sick brother-in-law, finally had to pay the price for his bestiality. After killing Fukao, the fierce flame of hatred in Xiaorong's heart seemed to cool down, giving way to extreme emptiness and exhaustion. She stood up, went to the bathroom to wash the blood off her body. Afterward, she changed into her favorite clothes, took the savings book with 10,000 yuan, and hurriedly set out in the darkness of night to return home to find her sister. Throughout the long journey home, Xiaorong's mind was in chaos, thoughts endlessly swirling. In her heart, she was violently torn between pain, regret, and fear about what had just happened. She didn't know how to face her sister, didn't know how to tell her sister about the crime her sister's husband had committed and about the desperate act she had just done. Arriving home when she saw the familiar face of the sister who had raised her since childhood, who had loved and protected her for so many years, Xiaorong could no longer contain her emotions. All the humiliation, pain, and fear that had been suppressed for days suddenly burst forth. She broke down crying like a child, her entire body trembling. Under her sister's wholehearted comfort, with a gentle voice and warm arms holding her tight, Xiaorong finally gradually regained her composure. Between choking sobs, she tearfully recounted the entire matter from beginning to end and handed over that savings book to her sister. After hearing the story, Xiaoxia felt like her entire world collapsed, her heart shattered into pieces. She held her younger sister tightly, and they both burst into tears together, tears falling endlessly. In her heart rose feelings of guilt and regret. She had married such a terrible man by mistake, not only destroying her own life with her own hands, but also inadvertently dragging her beloved younger sister into this horrible tragedy. If not for her, if not for trusting her brother-in-law, her sister wouldn't have had to endure such cruel injuries. That night, the two sisters sat together in the small room, talking all night long. Though they weren't highly educated and didn't know much about the law, They understood one simple and cruel thing. Killing someone requires paying with one's life, according to the law, would certainly result in the death penalty. This was an unavoidable consequence. Thinking about the dark future ahead, thinking about how her sister was still so young with a long life ahead that might now end, the small room echoed with heartbreaking cries again. Early the next morning, Xiaorong gathered the remaining courage within herself. With her sister's accompaniment and spiritual support, she walked into the police station to turn herself in, frankly confessing everything Foucault had done to her and her desperate decision that night. Of course, throughout that painful confession process, she couldn't avoid breaking down in tears many times when having to recount the details of the humiliation and injury she had endured. Her tears and trembling voice made even experienced police officers feel sorrowful and sympathetic toward this tragic situation. However, the law couldn't overlook a crime just because of pitiable circumstances. Although Foucault was clearly at fault first and had committed a serious crime, Xiaorong's choice not to report to the police to let the law handle it but to kill him herself was still an act violating the law, so she couldn't avoid punishment from the state. After the trial process, considering the special circumstances, that she was a victim of a serious crime, acted in a state of extreme emotional agitation, along with her sincere attitude of voluntarily surrendering and cooperating throughout the investigation process, the court finally sentenced Xiaorong to 12 years in prison. This matter quickly spread throughout the locality like a fire, causing an uproar of discussion in the community. Everyone talked about the case, about the young woman who killed her brother-in-law, about the dark secrets behind the case. Although behind prison bars, Xiaorong didn't directly hear the rumors outside, but she knew clearly that being humiliated and violated would forever be an indelible stain in her life. Although the law had recognized her as a victim in conservative feudal society, the bad reputation about women's honor would always pursue and haunt her. It was precisely because she couldn't bear to continue living in a state of mental torment, carrying pain and wounds that couldn't heal, that ultimately led to the tragic scene at the beginning of this story. In fact, deep in Zheng Xiaorong's inner heart, from the moment Chang Foucault, reeking of alcohol, burst into her room on that fateful night, she considered herself already dead. In today's society, the most precious thing isn't money or status, but living a decent, kind life and maintaining one's dignity. Each of us needs to learn how to protect ourselves, not only by living uprightly, but also having the courage to speak up, report abuse when violated, and always trust that legal justice exists to protect the vulnerable. The ancients had a saying, "Beautiful women have unfortunate fates," meaning beautiful women often have unfortunate destinies. In real life, indeed, many beautiful girls easily attract the attention of many people around them. However, sadly, the more attention they receive, the more gossip, trouble, and hidden dangers appear around them. For this very reason, in modern society, quite a few serious cases have occurred involving young, beautiful girls, people who should have had bright futures but encountered heartbreaking tragedies. On an afternoon in 2009, a young woman went to a villa located in a remote, quiet area to visit her cousin named Gongqi. It was a rather deserted area with not many neighbors around. When she arrived, the girl rang the doorbell, but no one answered. Feeling somewhat strange, she tried pushing the door lightly and realized it was unlocked. With some worry, she slowly stepped inside. But as soon as she crossed the threshold, the horrifying scene before her eyes left her frozen, unable to believe what she was seeing. Her cousin was lying motionless on the floor, completely naked. The most horrifying thing was that her head was almost completely severed from her neck. The entire scene was bloody and brutal beyond description. That horrifying moment caused the younger cousin to collapse onto the floor in extreme terror. She screamed in fear, her body trembling uncontrollably. Only after a while, when gradually regaining some consciousness, did she tremblingly take out her phone and hurriedly dial the police to report this horrific murder case. News of the mysterious and cruel death of a young, beautiful woman in her private villa quickly made headlines across all media outlets, shocking public opinion nationwide. This horrific murder case became the center of public and media attention. What kind of murder was this that the perpetrator acted so cruelly and savagely? What deep hatred existed between him and the victim? What major conflict led to such brutal, savage killing? Let's turn back time to a few days before. May 19th, 2009 was supposed to be just another ordinary working day at a high-end cosmetics company in Changsha City, Hunan Province, China. Employees were still busy with their work in the familiar atmosphere. However, on that very morning, everyone in the company suddenly noticed something quite unusual. Gong Qi, the beautiful female sales manager, famous in the company for her punctuality and hardworking, dedicated work attitude, didn't appear at the office today. What's more, she didn't call in sick or ask for leave from superiors as usual. This abnormal absence made colleagues extremely puzzled and worried because this was completely unlike Gong Qi's character. By nearly noon, Gong Qi still hadn't come to the company. This abnormal absence made everyone increasingly worried. The manager called her to ask the reason, but called repeatedly without being able to connect afterward because the company leadership was worried about their employee and feared Gong Qi living alone might have had an accident. They proactively contacted her family, asking them to go to her residence to check the situation. Gong Qi's family then contacted a cousin, also working in Changsha, calling and asking her to go directly to the apartment to check why Gong Qi hadn't come to the company all day. At that time, Gong Qi's parents hadn't thought of the worst scenario, simply thinking their daughter took a day off work and couldn't be contacted, so they asked the cousin to go check around 2 p.m. The cousin went to Gong Qi's single apartment located in the deserted outskirts of Changsha and discovered the incident. The 110 command center, after receiving the emergency call, hearing the victim's cousin describe in a trembling, panicked voice that this was an extremely tragic and cruel murder case, immediately didn't dare neglect at all. They quickly transferred this information to the criminal investigation team responsible for that area. Just minutes later, the criminal investigation team, along with the crime scene technical investigation unit, carrying complete specialized equipment, arrived at the villa and immediately proceeded to seal off and protect the scene and conduct meticulous examination. Through preliminary initial examination work, investigators discovered that Gong Qi's mobile phone, laptop, and many valuable personal items such as jewelry and cash were still intact at the scene. Nothing was missing. Combined with the victim's body condition and signs of savage violence at the scene, investigators quickly ruled out the possibility this was a murder for the purpose of robbery. Thus, the greatest possibility raised was that this case stemmed from deep personal conflict between the perpetrator and victim, or could be related to romantic issues. Police also quickly noticed that after committing the crime, the perpetrator was extremely meticulous in cleaning and handling the scene. Important traces that could be directly related to him, such as fingerprints, fallen hair, even bloodstains, were all handled extremely carefully and professionally. After meticulously examining the entire scene, investigators only found one faint footprint. Besides that, there was almost no other valuable clue or physical evidence. Looking at the cruelty and savagery in the method of committing the crime, investigators determined that the perpetrator was certainly an extremely bold, cold, cruel person with very strong anti-investigation capabilities. He might have prepared carefully before acting, or had certain knowledge about criminal investigation. These factors made the case-solving work become especially difficult and complex. Unable to find a breakthrough clue from the crime scene, police had to shift direction and seek breakthroughs from external factors. Therefore, in-depth investigation of Gong Qi's background, origins, personality, lifestyle, and social network became the top priority focus of the investigation. Who exactly was Gong Qi? What kinds of relationships had she had? Through the investigation and information gathering process, police gradually drew a picture of the victim. Gong Qi was a girl born and raised in Hunan Province. She had smooth white skin, a delicate, pretty face with harmonious features, especially a tall, slender figure that was very striking. In the eyes of many acquaintances, Gong Qi was truly a beautiful girl. When killed, Gong Qi was only 25 years old. Not only possessing striking beauty, Gong Qi was also a talented girl with a bachelor's degree graduated from Hunan University. After graduation, she joined a high-end cosmetics company in Changsha City as a sales staff. Thanks to her intelligence, constant effort, and outstanding work achievements, after just 2 years of hard work, she quickly received high evaluation from the company and was promoted from an ordinary employee to business manager position. Colleagues all evaluated Gongqi as smart, enthusiastic, and very dedicated to her work. According to detailed investigation results later, around 11 p.m. on the night the murder occurred, Gongqi was still actively texting and chatting with a close friend via social media. The two confided in each other, shared about life, and talked very happily, the conversation continuing until dawn. But around 1 a.m., Gongqi suddenly sent her friend a brief message with the content, "The window is shaking." The friend, reading this message, felt somewhat worried and replied to reassure her not to be afraid, it might just be wind or a cat passing by. However, after this message, Gongqi had no further response despite the friend continuously sending messages asking. The friend at that time thought perhaps Gongqi was tired and went to sleep, so didn't reply anymore. But who would have thought that was the last message in Gongqi's short life? In the very first days after the case occurred, the investigation team deployed a large-scale screening campaign. Police cordoned off a 3-mile, 5-kilometer radius around the crime scene, conducting meticulous screening of every alley, every lane, every household in the area to search for any clue or witness that might be related to the case. Simultaneously, over 100 individuals with criminal records living in this area were successively summoned by police to headquarters for interrogation and background verification. Among these suspicious individuals, a young man surnamed Zheng particularly attracted police attention. He had previously been arrested and convicted for the crime of breaking into a woman's house at midnight with intent to rape. Only because the victim's husband unexpectedly came home earlier than expected, he was caught red-handed on the spot and subsequently had to serve a 2-year prison sentence. Released from prison for over a year by the time the case occurred, Zheng temporarily seemed settled, working as a worker at a textile factory located quite near the area where the murder occurred. And what made police especially pay attention and suspect more was that the route from the cosmetics company where Gongqi worked to her single villa residence passed right in front of Zheng's house. This wasn't a random coincidence, but an important geographical factor. The initial reasoning of the special task force suggested it was very likely Zheng had repeatedly seen Gongqi, a beautiful young woman, pass this road every day after work hours. He might have secretly monitored and observed her daily habits for a long time. And when discovering that Gongqi lived alone in the villa without anyone to protect her, he very likely developed criminal intentions. With a history of sex crimes, advantageous geographical location, and opportunity to access the victim, these suspicions immediately made Zheng become suspect number 1, the focus of investigation for the entire case. An investigation team was assigned by leadership to secretly go to the textile factory where Zheng was working, silently approach and separately interrogate workers on the same shift as him to verify his schedule. However, the results from the collective workers' testimony unexpectedly led the case into a dead end. They unanimously confirmed clearly that at exactly the time the murder occurred, from the night of May 18th to the early morning of May 19th, the entire factory was in a period of overtime night shifts to complete a large order. And Zheng was fully present at the factory throughout that work shift, not requesting leave or absent at any time. There was even an attendance book and security camera at the gate confirming this. In other words, he had very solid alibi evidence. With this result, the entire investigation team felt both deeply disappointed and helpless about the situation. An almost perfect potential suspect, but ultimately had to be completely eliminated from the suspect list. For many long months after that, investigative forces worked tirelessly, continuously reviewing all files, reinterrogating related persons, expanding the investigation scope, pursuing even the smallest clue, but all efforts seemed hopeless. The perpetrator was like a mysterious ghost, coming in the night, committing cruel crimes, then disappearing without leaving any tangible trace that could be pursued. Every step, every direction of police investigation was continuously blocked by a severe lack of evidence. Gongqi was savagely murdered, That pain caused her family to collapse. However, beyond the grief, finding the perpetrator and appropriate punishment was the only way to soothe the departed soul. Gongqi's parents actively cooperated with police in helping screen all of their daughter's social relationships. However, after many verifications, all close relationships were eliminated. On the other hand, where Gongqi lived was quite remote. The case occurred in the middle of the night, so police couldn't find any eyewitness who saw the perpetrator. Gongqi's father later shared that he deeply regretted letting his daughter live in such a remote place. Since childhood, Gongqi had been an independent girl. After graduating from university, perhaps to save on rent, or possibly because she wanted a quiet space, she didn't choose to live in a bustling area, but instead moved alone to a single rental apartment in a remote villa complex far from downtown Changsha. That place originally had few passers-by, especially at night. There were almost no people. This was perhaps the objective condition for the perpetrator to easily commit the crime, then quickly escape through Gongqi's tragic death. Perhaps this is also a painful but necessary warning for many young women living and working in cities. In daily life that seems peaceful and normal, there actually always lurks countless dangers and risks that we cannot foresee. Each person, especially women, must always raise awareness and self-protection in all situations. Always consider safety factors when choosing a place to live, prioritize areas with crowded population, security cameras, and if possible, live with friends or relatives to ensure your own safety. And that is today's case. Thank you for watching and see you in the next videos.